And this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashanti Silva. On this week's episode, Lee Konitz, his life and times and best hits. So Lee Konitz was one of the leading saxophonists and composers of his time. He performed in a wide range of jazz styles from bebop to cool jazz to avant-garde jazz. He was also one of the proponents of the cool jazz movement alongside Miles Davis, Lennie, Tristano and others. Lee Konitz was born in 1927 in Chicago. At the age of 11, he received a clarinet for a birthday present and started playing, inspired mainly by Benny Goodman songs. An year later, he switched to saxophone playing after the style of Lester Young. Some of his early influences included Johnny Hodges, Roy Aldridge, Louis Armstrong and Benny Carter. He began performing professionally alongside Teddy Powell's band in 1945. In 1946, he met pianist Lennie Tristano and worked together with him in a cocktail bar. Lennie Tristano proved a massive influence on Konitz, mentoring him in style and technique. In the late 40s, he signed up with Miles Davis' band. His performances with them were later released on an album called Birth of the Cool on Capitol Records in 1957. So that was a bit of insight into the life and times and best hits of Lee Konitz. More details coming up. Also coming up, some trending festival and album news. Stay tuned to the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashanti Silva to find out more. We'll be right back after some music. And this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashanti Silva. On this week's episode, Lee Konitz, his life and times and best hits. During this hour, we're going to be talking about his biography. Lee Konitz is widely regarded as one of the leading cool jazz saxophonists of his time. He also recorded alongside other pioneers in cool jazz like the Miles Davis, Cool Donut, Claude Thornhill, Lennie Tristano and others. He also created a sound that was uniquely his own, recording and collaborating with a diverse range of instrumentalists and vocalists over his career. He started out playing the saxophone in New York City gigs. He then took up tutelage with Lennie Tristano, one of the proponents of the cool jazz revolution, and played alongside Miles Davis Nonet for a while. He then joined the Stan Kenton Big Band before starting out solo. Most of his recordings during the time were with bop musicians and with other students of Lennie Tristano's School of Music. He also played in duet and solo settings and also founded his own band, the Lee Konitz Nonet, in the 80s. Early on in his career, his saxophone style was more relaxed and uninflected, then in time it became more expressive without losing its clarity. He was also a great melodic improviser. In 1949, he debuted as a bandleader with the new album Subconcious-Lee. He continued to record as bandleader throughout the 50s, although in the early 50s he also had a stint with the Stan Kenton Orchestra. In 1961, he recorded what went down as one of his most influential albums, Motian, alongside Elvin Jones on drums and Sonny Dallas on bass. The album was comprised entirely of jazz standards. It also hallmarked Konitz's unique style and delivery. In 1967, he recorded another unique album, the Lee Konitz Duets. The album was significant in that it incorporated 3 saxophones and a trombone. The album incorporated everything from improvisation to duets to renditions of jazz classics. In 1971, Konitz had a film appearance in the film Desperate Characters. In 1981, he performed at the Woodstock Jazz Festival. During that time, he also collaborated and performed alongside other jazz legends like Warne Marsh, Dave Brubeck, Ornette Coleman, Charles Mingus, and others. With time, Konitz's style grew more experimental, and he released several free jazz and avant-garde jazz albums. In 2012, he had an outstanding live performance at the Blue Note Jazz Club alongside Bill Frisell, Gary Peacock, and Joe Barron. Lee Konitz died in 2020, leaving a legacy as a brilliant saxophonist and composer and a pioneer of the cool jazz movement. So that was a bit of insight into the biography of Lee Konitz, and this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashanti Silva. And this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashanti Silva. On this week's episode, Lee Konitz, his life and times and best hits. And now it's time for some trending album news. Lisa Hilton is an acclaimed jazz keyboardist whose music is inspired by the works of Duke Ellington, Thelonious Monk, Count Basie and others. She's also a prolific composer. She's produced more than 30 albums and has frequently topped the jazz charts with her music. So Lisa Hilton's out with a new album, Lucky All Along, a compilation of cool, impressionistic and uplifting tracks. So this album's full of interesting ideas and fuses diverse jazz styles with impressionistic themes. There's trumpeter Igma Thomas, who shines on tracks like And Some Blues, The Prophecies and Predictions, and is a perfect complement for Hilton's bluesy solos. Bassist Luke Curtis is very dynamic and energetic on the bass. 2 other highlights in which Hilton's impressionistic touch is brilliant: Hollywood Moment, a Bill Evans inspired track, and Starry Starry Eyes, which was inspired by painter Vincent van Gogh. And there's drummer Rudy Royston, whose creativity shines on the Latin teen songs like Little Beach Mornings and Escapist Fantasy. So that was some trending album news on the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashanti Silva. We're going for a short break. We'll be right back after that. When we come back, we're going to be talking about some of Lee Konitz's best albums of all time. Stay tuned. And this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashanti Silva. On this week's episode, Lee Konitz, his life and times and best hits. During this hour, we're going to be talking about some of his best albums of all time. Here's a quick recap of what's coming up. The first album is called Subconcious-Lee. This album was recorded by Konitz in collaboration with some of his fellow students of Lennie Tristano School of Music. The album features some fast-paced tracks, a swinging alternative to bebop. Other players on this album include saxophonist Warne Marsh, pianist Sal Moska, and bassist Arnold Frischken. The next album is called Lee Konitz at Storyville. This album came at a time when Konitz had broken away from Lennie Tristano School of Music and was setting out as a band leader. In this album, he explores some of his innovations in chord changes in songs like High Beck, Subconcious-Lee, and Soundly. He's joined on this album by pianist Ronnie Ball, bassist Percy Hart, and drummer Alan Levitt. And an album called Lee Konitz with Warne Marsh. This one's a beautiful collaboration between Lee Konitz and tenor saxophonist Warne Marsh. They made for a great team. Their long melodic lines and unusual tones caused them to stand out from the crowd. The album includes a compilation of jazz classics, and their renditions are based on innovations on chord changes. Also joining them on the album are pianist Sal Moska, guitarist Billy Ball, and others. So that was a quick recap of what's coming up during this hour, and this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashanti Silva. We're going for a short break, we'll be right back after that. Stay tuned. And this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashanti Silva. On this week's episode, Lee Konitz, his life and times and best hits. During this hour, we're going to be talking about some of his best albums of all time. The first one's called Subconcious-Lee, released in 1950. So Lee Konitz started out playing the saxophone and clarinet after being attracted to the big band swing era songs that he heard on radio. He started out in his teens playing professionally in gigs in the 40s. By the age of 20, he had signed up with Claude Thornhill's orchestra, which included Jill Evans and Jerry Mulligan. He also went on to star in Miles Davis' Birth of the Cool Donut, which also included Evans and Mulligan. So at the time, Lee had been taking classes from Lennie Tristano, who was his musical guru. Tristano's method was based on improvisation without cue cards. He also inspired Lee to fashion his style after that of Lester Young, Roy Aldridge, and Charlie Christian. So Subconcious-Lee was recorded at that time. It incorporates 4 sessions taken between 1949 and 1950. Basically, the band collaborating with him were students of Lennie Tristano's, including himself. There's Tristano himself on 5 of the tracks. Other members collaborating with him on the songs include tenor saxophonist Warne Marsh, pianist Sal Moska, and guitarist Billy Ball. The album is full of rapid solos and swinging bebop melodies. Many of the songs are intricate renditions of existing classics. For example, the title track is based on the Cole Porter jazz classic What Is This Thing Called Love? Marshmallow is a rendition of Ray Noble's Cherokee. So this was a very futuristic approach to music when it was first released in the 50s. Lee Konitz at Storyville was released in 1988 on Storyville Records. This album was recorded at a time when Konitz was touring and performing alongside a diverse range of bands, particularly Stan Kenton's orchestra. He'd tour and perform alongside them across the USA. He typically played on the rhythm sections, lending an element of Tristano's method in his music. This album was taken from a live performance in 1954. His playing is cool and dry and he's on top form here. He's also technically impressive, with his playing featuring long, elaborate phrases and sudden flights into the alto saxophone's upper register. He was also experimenting with some technical innovations of his own, as is seen in melodies like High Beck, Subconcious-Lee, and Soundly. The performance comes from a series of live performances in 1954. The tracks are warm, swinging, and great straight-ahead jazz. Lee Konitz with Warne Marsh was recorded in 1955 and released on Verve Records. This album was recorded in collaboration with another pupil of Tristano's, Warne Marsh, a saxophonist. Their contrast in style synchronized perfectly, and they went on to record several sessions together in later years. Warne had a dark, nostalgic tenor sound that complemented Konitz on alto saxophone perfectly. The two saxophones are exceptional on tracks like Topsy and Charlie Parker's Donna Lee. Parker was a revolutionary in bebop, and many players in the 50s took up his style. So at the time this album was recorded, dynamic bebop jazz was mainstream, and this comparatively relaxed sound was part of a cool jazz revolution at the time. Other ensembles that adopted the cool jazz style were Miles Davis Nonet and Jerry Mulligan's quartet with Chet Baker. Also, many of Tristano's pupils would team up with other genres in their sessions. Here, for instance, Konitz and Marsh are supported by the pioneers of bop, drummer Kenny Clark and bassist Oscar Pettiford. So that was some insight into some of Lee Konitz's best albums of all time, and this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashanti Silva. On this week's episode, Lee Konitz, his life and times and best hits. And now it's time for some trending album news. Paul Adams and Elizabeth Gieser are out with a new album called A Journey of Dreams. Gieser and Adams are award-winning instrumentalists. They've been collaborating on music since their acclaimed debut album Imaginings in 2015. Their music has amassed hundreds of millions of streams on streaming services. Their music is all about spiritual, and A Journey of Dreams is the next chapter in their musical saga. It was originally meant to be released much earlier but met with some delays, and the album is finally going up for release on December 15th. The music incorporates a wide range of instrumentals, including the electric sitar, one of Adams' own innovations. So basically, this album is a continuation to their previous albums. Adams said of the album, "We wanted to focus on beauty, especially as the world seems to be in such deep chaos. Elizabeth said her vision was to create a safe refuge through the music. She says, "Imagine a place where you once came from, where you will go back to, and a place you sometimes visit in dreams." So overall, the theme of this album is a rise to the challenges of everyday life, to dig deep within to find the beauty that everything in nature contains. This theme carries in songs like Journey of Dreams, The Emergence, The Arrival, Gabriel, A Beautiful Sadness, and more. So that was some trending album news on the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashani Silva. We're going for a short break. We'll be right back after that. When we come back, we're going to be talking about more of Lee Konitz's best albums of all time. Stay tuned.